All right, today we are jumping head first into a massive debate, one that sits at the very heart of how we think about law and society. It's a philosophical showdown that really shapes everything, from our government to our own individual rights. So let's kick things off with a huge question, one we probably take for granted most of the time. What actually gives a law its power? I mean, what makes a rule on a piece of paper something that can actually command us, shape our lives, and be enforced? Is it really just about checking the right boxes? As long as it was passed correctly, following all the official rules? Or for a law to have real authority, does it need to be something more? Does it need to be morally fair? This right here is the central battleground we're exploring. To help us figure this out, we've got two philosophical heavyweights in the ring. In the corner for procedure, we have H.L.A. Hart, a giant in the world of legal positivism. And in the other corner, fighting for justice, we have John Rawls, a thinker whose ideas on fairness completely revolutionized the game. So first up, let's step into H.L.A. Hart's world. It's a world built on clear, logical rules and procedures. This whole school of thought is called legal positivism. So what is legal positivism exactly? Well, for Hart, it all comes down to this. A law is a valid law if it has the right pedigree. Think of it like a purebred dog. Its value comes from its lineage, how it was created. He argues that whether the law is morally good or bad is a totally separate question. For him, there's no necessary link between law and morality. And that really brings us to Hart's core focus. He isn't asking, is this a good law? He's asking a much more technical question. Is this a valid law? Was it created according to the system's own rules? For him, those are two completely different conversations. Okay, so how do you check a law's pedigree? Hart came up with this brilliant concept he called the rule of recognition. You can think of it like a chain of authority. A law is valid because it was passed by the legislature. Well, why can the legislature do that? Because the Constitution gives them that power. And why do we listen to the Constitution? Because the key officials and people within that system accept it as the ultimate source of legal rules. It's a clean, logical procedural test. All right, now let's pivot and bring in John Rawls, because he looks at this neat and tidy world of rules and says, hold on a minute, that's not enough. For Rawls, we have to look beyond the procedure and ask about the substance, about justice itself. And this quote, this is absolutely central to everything Rawls believed. He's saying that, yeah, procedures are important, but justice is the first virtue. It's the number one non-negotiable standard for any institution, especially a legal system. If a law is unjust, it doesn't matter how perfectly it was created. It has failed its most important test. So here's the kicker for Rawls. A law's real authority, its legitimacy, isn't just a technical thing about how it was made. It is at its core a moral question. He completely rejects the idea that you can just neatly separate law from morality. For him, they're fundamentally connected. And this is his standard for what makes a law legitimate. It sounds a little academic, but the idea is actually super powerful. What he's saying is that political power is only proper when it's based on a constitution that all of us, imagining ourselves as free and equal people, could rationally agree to. It ties the law's authority directly to the consent of the people it governs. So, to put it simply, Hart looks backwards, tracing the procedural family tree of a law. Rawls looks at the law's content and asks a different question. Is this aligned with principles of justice that we could all, as free and equal citizens, agree to? That's where its real authority comes from. Okay, so we've got our two competing theories. We have Hart's procedural validity on one side and Rawls's moral legitimacy on the other. Now, the best way to really see the difference is to put them to the test with a classic thought experiment. The problem of the unjust law. Let's imagine this. What happens when a society follows its own rulebook perfectly? Every single procedure is followed to the letter, but the law that comes out the other end is just deeply, fundamentally unfair. How do our two thinkers handle that? So here's our scenario. A law is passed through all the proper channels. It has a perfect procedural pedigree, but its content is horrible. It strips an entire minority group of their right to vote. And this table just lays the disagreement bare. If you ask Hart, is this law legally valid? He'd have to say, yes, it followed the rule of recognition. Now, he would also say it's morally monstrous, but that doesn't change its status as law. But then you turn to Rawls and ask, does this law have moral legitimacy? And you'd get a hard, absolutely not. Why? Because no free and equal citizens could ever reasonably agree to a system that could just disenfranchise them like that. It fails the basic test of justice, so it lacks true authority.
So we've seen the theories, we've seen the test case, but this isn't just some abstract philosophical game. This conflict has huge real-world implications for how we live and how we relate to the law. I mean, seriously, how you answer this question, procedure versus justice, it literally defines what you think your rights are and when you have a duty to obey the law. Or, maybe more importantly, when you might have a duty to resist it. Think about it. This is the moral language people use to justify civil disobedience against laws they see as unjust, even if those laws are on the books. This debate gives us a standard to judge our own legal system. Are we just going through the motions, or are we actually trying to achieve justice? It forces all of us to ask what we really expect from our laws. And that leaves us with one final, crucial question for you to think about. In our own society, right now, when these two things clash, and they do, all the time, which one do we tend to value more? Following the rules to the letter, or achieving a truly just outcome for everyone? The answer to that says everything about the kind of society we are and the kind of society we want to be.